My name is Victoria Findlay Wolfe, and I am honored to have an exhibit of my double wedding ring quilts here at the AQS Paducah, Kentucky Quilt Week show. I have a serious double wedding ring problem. Most people maybe will make one double wedding ring quilt in their lifetime, and I've made over 60 double wedding rings. I find it fascinating to really play within the pattern of a traditional shape or pattern of the double wedding ring and look to see how many different ways that I can come up with some interesting designs. So I hope you enjoy a little sneak peek of some of the quilts in the exhibit. So you will notice that this is not a double wedding ring quilt, and it maybe is not your average bed-size quilt. So I live in New York City in the Garment Center, and there was a building in my neighborhood that was just renovated, which happens to be my bank. The lobby is beautiful, white marble, but there's no art. And I, as a quilter, thought we really need to have something beautiful to represent our quilters hanging in a building in New York City. So for New York Public Art, you have to send a proposal in, but I have to make the project first. So I made the giant quilt to be able to submit it for public art display, thinking it would go in any particular building in New York City. And then I got a phone call while I was making it when Simplicity Pattern Company, creative group, found out that I was making this large quilt. They have new offices in New York, and they said, we have a 40-foot wall. And I said, well, I have a 30-foot quilt. So it turns out now that their offices are actually in the bank building that originally inspired me to make the quilt in the first place. Now, you've heard of the Field of Dreams? This is it. You build it and they will come. That is totally what happened with this quilt. So no paperwork for me. This quilt is going on to its new home at the Simplicity Creative Group in Easy Quilting. I'm super pleased. It's a big one. So these two quilts are a slightly different take on the double wedding ring. It's still a traditional double wedding ring pattern, but you're going to notice that the melon of the double wedding ring is now about this big. It's very huge. But for me, that's an opportunity to play within those spaces and try something different. So these two quilts are actually identical. This one using completely all-in solids and sometimes taking color out of the quilt to give the pattern something that looks completely different. Now, after I made the completely solid version, I really liked my prints. So I immediately went and started making another quilt completely out of my scrap bins. What do you find when you get an opportunity to do that is you find what kind of fabrics you purchase over and over and over again. For me, it is big florals and a lot of polka dots. This is a totally me quilt. These two quilts, again, are a pair. This was the first one that I made, but sometimes my quilts don't happen immediately. This middle section of my quilt actually started 4 years before I was actually doing double wedding rings. I had made the block, maybe didn't do such a great job of piecing it in the beginning, but came back later when I found inspiration from a quilt made by my grandmother. So using what I saw in her quilt reminded me of this piece, came back to my studio, and I had actually had these pieces cut out for an entirely different quilt. Again, finding out that I purchased the same kind of fabrics over and over again. The orange and the greens were the same, and I could finish my story and make the element that inspired me to finish the quilt in the first place by my grandmother's work, finally made this a complete thought. So this quilt is called a summer's day, and if you're going to have a summer's day, you might as well have a cloudy day. Again, using fabrics of a limited palette and finding a solution without having to purchase more. Working with some hard angles and also with some curve angles, adding in little dots of color. You might notice that there are small little dots that go around the quilt. I'm actually I'm able to tell you exactly where to look around the outside of the quilt. I'm getting you to look at certain points that I find interesting. So using that hard edge and the curves in the design of the quilt, I'm carrying that through the entire design. So adding in quilting elements, little hard edge and the little polka dots, I'm able to tell that story through the whole visual effect of the quilt, including the edge of the quilt. You'll notice the hard edge and the curves that end around the borders of the quilt, because ultimately it's my fabric. I get to do whatever I want with it. So if I want to cut it and change it and do something a little funky, I'm good with that. So thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed a little sneak peek at my double wedding ring exhibit, and we hope to see you again at another AQS Quilt Week show.